All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to Catch Data Privacy Week. We're excited to have you here for our discussion on accountability. My name is Max Henderson. I'm the head of product at Catch. I'm joined by Alysa Hutnik, partner at Kelly Dry. Alysa, welcome. Intro yourself, please.
Thank you. So I chair Kelly Dry's privacy practice group. I'm a lawyer, but I will say I really try to focus on being very practical. So looking forward to talking today.
Awesome. Well, let's kick right into it. The number one thing, at least for me, is I actually don't understand the difference between enforcement and accountability. So I'm hoping that you can educate us all on the line. How should we think about what accountability is and how it is different than enforcement?
Sure. So, well, number one, I think with privacy, there's been so much focus on drafting notices and getting the right language and building the right program, nuts and bolts. And you just hope you won't get tagged, for example, by a regulator. And even what we saw in the first year or two of California's new law, the enforcement was a very light touch, only one public enforcement. Otherwise, they were, pretty general summaries. I don't think we get a hall pass anymore. There's been enough time that the tires will be kicked on what are your actions behind those words. And that may be from regulators, so that's the enforcement, but it's a whole ecosystem. It's your partners upstream and downstream. Everybody is going to be pressure testing to manage their own risk. And so I think it just gets really real.
So uh, I will say it's hard for me to envisage what pressure testing looks like, whether it's from partners or it's from auditors, right? Whatever the entity doing the pressure testing. Um, Obviously, I hawk software for a living, been doing it for a while. The pressure testing I've received in the past comes in the form of, at least for acting as a vendor, profoundly painful questionnaires, hundreds of questions long, sometimes thousands. We're in one right now that's over 1,500 questions. Is that what pressure testing looks like, or are there other artifacts or um, documents? I'm not sure what form it takes, but what is there guidance? What would you tell us as the community what that would look like?
Sure. Well, there's no better truth serum than when you get a subpoena from a government regulator and you've got a 15-page subpoena with all sorts of information and document requests that you need to provide within a really short period of time under penalty of perjury, right? You have to sign that it is all accurate. And while there's a lot of effort in building and checking the box that you've got different things, it's another thing, and I see it every time with clients, when you have to pull all of that together and tell a cohesive story about the narrative, about your program and how it works, as well as the documentation that supports all of those pillars of your privacy program.
It sounds very daunting, if I'm honest. Are there? I guess for me, one of the things that I found helpful when I started in privacy, which was during the gear up or wind up for GDPR. I found it very helpful that when people talked about needing a ROPA, uh, the ICO and Keneal and other folks of that ilk provided real tangible. This is what it looks like, and they set the bar in a way that was comforting for me when I didn't know what good looked like. Can we expect the same sort of guidance from folks on this side of the pond when we think about accountability in 2024, or is it still sort of a said frankly, everything you said makes a lot of sense. I don't know what the artifacts perfectly look like, and maybe nobody does, but I'm curious what you imagine the journey for getting that clarified might look like and who would be involved.
Sure. And the daunting part absolutely resonates. And I would emphasize as a theme, good faith goes a really long way. And good faith meaning thoughtfulness. You put time into it to come up with a program, right? It doesn't need to be perfect, but you identified foreseeable risks. You know what data that you have. You have taken reasonable measures to try to address all of the obligations that are in all of these different, in some cases, competing laws. So I think in many ways, it's can you tell the story and do you have documents to support the story that you are telling? You may have some gaps in that, but if you've prioritized within that program What's the most sensitive information you have, right? Where is there the most risk of harm? Which are the vendors in your marketing sphere? And those might be the ones I'd focus on first, as opposed to the 1,000 possible vendors. So priority on what you're doing, and then being able to tell your story and show your story.
Got it. So perhaps in my own way of thinking, it sounds like one of the maybe new interesting bits in this is a very clear, almost summary of the program's inner workings. I'm so used to thinking about artifacts that show, yeah, here's the stuff I have and what I do, and some of the assessments that have been taken on to verify we're not over our skis. But it sounds like you're saying we also should show up, or think about showing up with a, here's how I run my privacy program, the steps that I take, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And we've been talking about regulators, but I think about it from commercial partnerships and reducing friction. And if you are a trustworthy partner and you can demonstrate that in a very efficient, persuasive way, such as having that narrative ready to go and examples of documents, materials that support that, I think you move faster than others who are scrambling to be able to tell that story.
Are there other artifacts that you can imagine being important outside of assessments that you've taken, and the summary of the program, and perhaps the colloquial data map, which might manifest more as a ROPA in Europe? Are there other substantive things that might be different that we're not thinking about or not talking about just yet?
Well, the connective tissue in the program is risk assessments, right? The internal risk assessments. We talked about prioritization. Well, that's a risk assessment process to even prioritize. And so that's showing your homework and thinking about what's an efficient way, right? It's not every document, but having some strategic plan, right? The top level plan, budgeting around that. I think those are things sometimes we don't think about because they're different stakeholders. They may not be the lawyer, they may not be the compliance person, but privacy programs are holistic. So really thinking about where are the other stakeholders and maybe supporting documentation to help put that together at the top level.
You think as a result of this, so there's the accountability constructs, and obviously there's more work to do. And I am grateful that you said, this is what allows me to sleep at night, is you have a very reassuring way about helping clarify that there aren't boogeymen on the other end of this. If you're operating in good faith and you're demonstrating a willingness and effort around putting a program together in a thoughtful way, as you just said, it goes a long way. I think that's helpful. Of course, it is still daunting. What should practitioners think about in terms of the impact of these new obligations on staffing a program? It's always a topic. I listen to people talk about how undernourished the function is already. And I'm not sure that we say it's become a board level issue. Maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. I don't necessarily feel it, to be perfectly blunt. Does this just stress the program even more, or do you think this has an impact on staffing up to the C-suite based on the conversations you're having today?
Well, history is a guide. I think of cybersecurity and where that started when there was initial laws in place as opposed to just industry best practices. And when the FTC started enforcing data security, that drove budget, that drove headlines. And that was a long time to really get to where we are now with that. And we are on the journey with privacy. But the journey doesn't kind of come to full fruition this year. I do think there's a lot this year that is going to advance that more so than before. Because I agree with you. Privacy teams tend to be under, maybe you have just one or two or three, not that many people for a whole company infrastructure that needs to be addressed. And sometimes it's coming from a legal budget, which is really not designed to support that. Sometimes it's coming from a business budget that doesn't really have visibility into why and the prioritization of why you need certain things. So again, we're on a journey.
It's interesting you say that. I want to come back to it in a minute. We'll put a pin in it. Who should own privacy? I know it's not accountability. And my next question actually is not about necessarily accountability either, but it is related, and it is about enforcement. it does feel like you're implying that unless and until there's material substantive enforcement, we're not going to get the kind of staffing that at least I see practitioners need. I work with a massive company that has two sturdy, wonderful, strong women running the privacy program for a many thousands of employees organization, and that story is not it's not unique. So on the one hand, it sounds like it's about to get harder, but the only way to the other side where staffing comes is basically a little bit of Russian roulette. Is kind of what it feels like. I'm not sure there's a good answer, but is that really I suppose the only path? We have to see enforcement. And do you foresee this year any material change in the enforcement?
Well, I think companies always have competing needs, and everything is clamoring for budget, and there's always prioritization by the company. I think we see for those who have been burned, who have been the targeted one for another issue where they weren't in time with certain obligations, there's a different culture and budgeting associated with that. And so I do see a whole lot more enforcement ahead. We're already seeing that. We see every time the FTC has a privacy enforcement, there's a whole lot of activity behind the scenes because it motivates. It's a very clear, these are the expectations and these are the consequences if you don't have that in place. So I see more of that this year, and I do think that will drive more attention from the business side instead of necessarily the legal side, the boards, that will drive moving it up on the priority scale.
Got it. The pinned question I want to unpin now, as it relates to budgets and where people are operating today. I noticed that a lot of the folks who are on the legal side or own the privacy program, it's a little bit understaffed. We've been talking about it. Should they be enrolling their technology counterparts and the associated budgets as a strategic way to more effectively staff while we're in this transition period? And what can you say about folks you've worked with who have or haven't done it and whether or not that's worked?
So I think that is the sign of a successful privacy program by the company. You do need privacy by design means having champions, and they definitely don't need to be lawyers, and they often should not be lawyers, right? Engineers, data scientists, marketing. You need a privacy champion because you can't have one person or one type of software recognize all of the potential snafus or just ideas, right? That need to be vetted and have a layer of privacy built into that. And so that's the concept of privacy by design as a culture, and then finding the strategic places to have those champions within the business.
I've certainly, just to echo that, I've seen that work. I've seen that. Ironically enough, I've met with maybe a few engineering focused or only exclusively led privacy programs, and I can say those don't really work. And I more frequently meet with privacy teams who have very little juice in the organization. They haven't made those relationships with their counterparts in the kind of the building side of the business or the marketing side of the business, and those don't work either. But the ones that we have that have kind of created that relationship or bridge are definitely the most wildly successful from my side. So we're certainly seeing the same things. I want to switch gears now. I want to go through a few different topics that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, and maybe you can help me apply the new lens of accountability to those topics. The first one being consent management. It's very dear to me, mostly because when we started the Catch company, the overwhelming observation that I made when we were thinking about what's your land product, it was consent management, because we did a survey of the ComScore top 100, and we looked at the relationship between the switches and the button actions and the network traffic and the data collection practices and all that good stuff, and found that there was overwhelmingly a profound disconnect. And I still see that today. I still go into calls and people are like, "Yeah, man, cookies. Let's move on." And which has never jived. That's my soapbox. I'll come off it. But is this the moment where, at least for things like consent management, the consent collection is not enough, and people understand that, and the make it so, as I think about it, is equally important and part of the accountability?
Well, the connection here, I think, with accountability is, I do think people are getting wise, but I think litigation is driving the necessity of understanding that distinction. There has been a lot of creative private lawsuits about wiretapping, and that your consent banner, whether you have it, whether it's synced with the tags that are on your site and when they fire, and if there is a disconnect there, or you're not capturing consent under these state wiretap laws, they're alleging that's an illegal pen register or illegal wiretapping. So it's just driving, I think, a lot of very substantive conversations about what is happening on our website, what is happening with our data, right? Not just cookie based, but identifier based. And so those conversations, I think, are now becoming much more robust. But the litigation is the teeth that I've seen as a big motivator to drive those conversations.
Wow. Why? I was not expecting wiretapping, I must admit.
Pen register, right? These are not things that we think about necessarily when you look at a website.
That is monumental. I'm excited to see how that plays out. Another one that's maybe topical, at least in my small orbit here at Catch, this concept of clean rooms. I meet with a lot of prospects. I talk to a lot of people who are in the clean room camp, and it's an awesome kind of space to watch unfold. But there seems to be this perception that if I buy a clean room, all my data exchanges with my other business partners, which I think you would argue are certainly sales, in that they advance the ends of targeted advertising. First of all, is it the case, and should someone think that a clean room obviates the need to have consent management practices and those embedded in the context of the clean room? That's question one.
Well, it's not a magic silver bullet. I mean, that's the reality. But I have empathy, because there is loss of what we call signal, right? The ability to find, have more information to find more audiences. And so there's been a lot of interest in collaborations, data collaborations. And I mean, you got to give it to marketers. Even the moniker of clean room sounds really good. And they do provide, from an accountability standpoint, they give a lot more control. There's the possibility of certainly more data protection measures in place, so that there's not data leakage, and you have criteria around who can access, what can access, and then you don't have orphan copies of this data just all around in different environments. So there's so many positive things about clean rooms, but it still matters what is happening in the clean room and for what purpose, and to have controls about how the data that's being utilized in the clean room, and then what data is coming out, and who are the parties. That all is relevant.
Interesting. I think you said it, and that's the kind of the looming question for me is, does a business in this new world of accountability really need to think about audits or proof points of their interrogations of data? Every time someone writes a query, or the MapReduce jobs that go off every morning to process and deliver analytical value, is it the expectation that at some point in this journey, data management practitioners need to start thinking about how do they assemble that type of proof as part of the, we're respecting privacy choices in every single data interrogation? Is that where it's headed?
So the short answer is yes. That is absolutely where it's headed in black letter law. Today, we have it in the requirements to have risk assessments and making sure that you are honoring choice, right? If somebody's opted out, or even if a certain data practice deserves a choice, that you're honoring that within that flow. So you have to do that today. But we've seen some draft rules that really are all about tracking your models and any kind of automated decision-making, including as to behavioral advertising, and giving some choices there, which mean logging all of your models and doing the risk assessments and tracking, and getting a lot more granular on what's going in, what's coming out, what decisions are being made. There are a variety of ways law applies today, and it's just going to get more granular going forward.
Something we need to I think every person who actually internalizes what you just said, that's a big statement, and it's I'm sure, having been, building data management products for a little while now, most of my colleagues are not thinking about. So it's good to have a little bit of forewarning that that's something that we need to show up with in the brave new world.
Yeah, really quickly, just on that, I think we focus on the shiny object, the business outcome, what's going to advance, that the privacy part of it often gets lost. I will just flag the FTC's recent enforcement against Rite Aid, which was using biometric facial recognition for fraud protection. But it was making decisions, and it was being used in ways that did injure people. And the accountability there for their modeling and deployment of technology, the FTC took issue with that. And so there's different ways that gets deployed today with real teeth, in addition to what's coming around the corner legally.
That is also quite sobering, at least for me. On the DSR side, what should we be thinking about? I have customers that ask me all the time for, I would say, interesting and unique features in the context of facilitating a DSR. Maybe most topical for me is the idea that the way that the data is presented to the individual needs to have a very specific format, very perfectly human readable. I guess similarly, people talk about portability obligations, and that really has a meaning that I don't think is delivered in the context of the way practitioners satisfy those types of requests. Is that going to change, or should we not expect that the way that maybe the industry writ large right now is satisfying rights requests will be impacted by this?
I think it depends. Today, we're in a compliance mode where the law says we need to provide certain information, and we need to make sure we're providing the information, and that's today. I think from a business standpoint, not a legal standpoint, when the customer experience really becomes a priority, then there's money and budget put into also what it looks like. And so you need to not have it be deceptive under today's law, to have it really look beautiful, which we would love as humans, but that's really a marketing component. That's a user experience component that really requires more business investment. And I anticipate there's competition on this in the future, right? Mm-hmm. It goes to building consumer trust. I think today we're still on the continuum in the less mature phase where we just need to get it in place. And I would make sure I would prioritize on what matters now, which is getting it in place and making sure it works correctly.
That is the perfect transition to one of my final questions for you. You have, as I mentioned, at least for me, a very remarkable ability to put someone who is in the crosshairs of managing a program at ease, and giving very practical go-dos that kind of block out the noise and make it actionable. So, given that wind up, no pressure, but in the context of accountability in 2024, what are the two things, noise aside, what if I'm a practitioner and I'm going home or into the office today, what should I think about are the two things I need to make dramatic change around for my program?
I would make sure that my digital advertising practices, in fact, are complying with law. That is the area that just gets enforced the most. It's the most visible. It's where we're seeing private litigation. That's the red zone. I think that you just need to get it right. So that is one. And then training. We talked about privacy champions. You cannot do this alone. It can't be one person, but you can get a whole lot more mileage if you've got some awareness and training and champions within. And so I would really try to figure out how can I get the most bang for my buck in doing that.
That's actionable, and I appreciate that. I'm sure the folks who are watching this appreciate it. My final question for you before we open it up to the folks on the line, and this is something we've been, peppering throughout all these conversations in Data Privacy Week. Apparently the trend, which I think is a sign that's a market on the move, and that's great, and maybe help is coming, but we're seeing a massive increase in people who are taking data privacy jobs, people who have privacy in their title, DPOs, and that's obviously a good thing for what we all hope and want to come. And it's also very, very scary. And it's overwhelming. And I think the question we want to ask all of our panelists this week is, you've been in the game a while. What's the one piece of advice for folks in their first 100 days in these new privacy jobs?
We don't do enough observation. And I think just getting to know the business, getting to know the people, doing a whole lot of listening, a whole lot of observing, that helps you understand the environment you're in. And it helps you understand the business objectives, right? What's really critical revenue-wise. And I think that helps you fill in the pieces of where does privacy layer on. If you're working against the grain, it's just going to be that much harder. And we're there to enable and to support and to help the company compete. And I think you need to know that foundation of the business, its reason to be the best privacy champion within the company.
Not that I'm being asked, but I would echo that, at least from what I see. I think I mentioned earlier, I think the people that have made the connections to the business, and I'm a practitioner, and I've seen a lot of these things go badly when there's this perception that the privacy person is somehow, the internal police or the hall monitor at school, right? And it's just, and that's not the case. Having worked with so many, that is certainly not the ambition, but creating the connections within the organization and making sure it's very clear that you're business focused and you're there to serve the business needs. I think it's very important, and it lends itself to collaboration. That's super important to getting these things done. So I would echo that. We have a question from the crowd. Can you talk a little bit more about what we can expect from FTC in terms of focus areas, predictions like more Rite Aids?
Sure. So sensitive data, and that goes for children's data. So COPPA, I think that's going to be a big issue. We've already seen so much with health data, geolocation, precise geolocation. So I think any facial recognition, any kind of what we would consider sensitive data, big focus in the technology sphere. That's what I see as the top scope. I think that we can expect more of that.
Outstanding. Well, if there aren't any more questions from the crowd, I don't have any more, but I will thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to doing this again with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.